The Higgs boson idea was predicted in 64. It became useful in 67. And then scientists started looking for it. So in the early 2000s, people were starting to think that we had built particle accelerators more powerful enough to be able to create these vibrations and detect them. So the accelerator that was working at the time was a large particle accelerator outside Chicago at Fermilab called the Tevatron.
Mm-hmm.
And we were colliding protons and antimatter protons at near the speed of light at very high energy. And that was the accelerator at which the top quark was discovered in 95. But we had upgraded our apparatus. We had 10 times the number of collisions per second. We had slightly more energy. And we were banging the protons and the antimatter protons together, hoping that we would actually find the Higgs boson.
Can you actually back up a little bit and look at the bigger picture? So Fermilab has this legendary accelerator that there's also a personal story with you connected to it because, I mean, there's a million questions I want to ask you and we'll ask you about some aspects of that. So this idea of an accelerator, the design and the physics of an accelerator, how is that productive for understanding and discovering different aspects of particle physics?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. I mean, this is fascinating. All right.
Yeah.
Everybody has heard Einstein's equation E equals mc squared. Nobody knows what it means. Maybe they heard that energy equals mass and mass equals energy. I don't know, but they've heard the equation, the most famous equation in all of science. But buried inside that equation is a really thoroughly fascinating concept that energy and matter are equivalent. And you can, in fact, convert movement energy into mass. And so this is something that we've known for a long time. This was predicted back in basically 1928, so a long time ago, actually almost 100 years ago. And it is not in the slightest bit controversial. We can do this all the time. So the simplest thing is to take two particles that have no structure. So, the closest thing you can have to BBs that are just true mathematical BBs. If you smash those two things together, it's coming in with a huge amount of energy from one direction, a huge amount of energy from the other direction. The directions cancel. So the net momentum, the net energy of this has no motion. So you have these two things coming in with exactly balanced energy. And if they collide, they could stop. Well, that energy has to go somewhere. And that energy can literally create mass, create particles. Now, there are special rules about what happens. If you have two things coming together and it creates a particle, it has to create an antimatter particle to balance it. That's just kind of the rules of the laws of nature. Why is that the case? Well, we have some ideas, but in many respects, the answer is because those are the laws of the universe. And that's the things that we try to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But this is absolutely true. So what particle accelerators do, among other things, is simply transform energy into particles. And so basically any particle that doesn't exist in nature, we can make in this way. You can make the antimatter electron by taking two particles, smashing them together. The energy sits there and it will make an electron and an antimatter electron. And it just does. And we know that the antimatter electron was discovered in 1932. This is all pretty easy. The antimatter proton was discovered in 1955 at the Berkeley Bevatron. And so this is just what you do. You can convert energy into a matter-antimatter particle. Now, the converse goes true, and that's something we might talk about. You can take matter and antimatter and bring it together, and it'll make energy. It's the process can go both ways. Energy can make matter and antimatter. Matter and antimatter can make energy. And this is just true. We do it all the time. There's no question that this is the case.
And we should also mention that this is the reason why Fermilab had a nice stash of antimatter particles. So as a side effect, you can also collect antimatter in this kind of way.
Sure.
You can produce antimatter, but it's extremely costly.
Oh, very, very costly. In order, at the Fermilab machine, we would have to smash 100,000 protons into something to make one antimatter proton. So, I mean, it took some work.
Is there some extremely precise recipe of being able to produce particular kinds of particles and all this kind of stuff when you smash two things together? Is there like how can you control accurately which kind of particles you're trying to produce?
If you want to make antimatter electrons, you smash together energy at a certain. It's just easier with electrons because the electrons, to the best of our knowledge, have nothing inside them. So they're simple. They have a certain mass, and that's that. So if you smash particles together with the right energy, you can make them very, very easily because you can. It's like a old style radio back in the day where you had to dial it in. You could get right on the station and you could hear the signal. And if you were off a little, it didn't work. The problem for things like protons and so forth is they're not point-like particles. They're kind of like garbage cans full of stuff. And so it's very difficult to make antimatter protons. Now, you can get more of them by increasing the energy at which you collide two particles together. If you're at below a certain energy, and you collide two protons together at kind of low energy, you just don't have enough energy to make an antiproton. And so it doesn't happen. You get to a certain energy and you can just barely make them. The more energy you collide them together, the more you make. So that is just sort of how it works. More is better.
And then with CERN, if you compare maybe CERN and Fermilab, going to Perplexity here, CERN's accelerator, the Large Hadron Collider (LHC), is the world's highest energy proton collider, while Fermilab's current and planned accelerators focus on intense proton beams for neutrino physics rather than pushing the absolute energy frontier. Absolute energy frontier meaning highest possible energy smashing of protons together.
Correct. So one, we were talking about like accumulating antimatter.
Yes.
All right. And so that is typically making antiprotons as opposed to making all particles in general. So let's focus on the antiproton side to begin with. All right. So Fermilab doesn't make antiprotons anymore. We stopped making them in 2011. And it's because we shut our big accelerator down to concentrate on a different facet of particle physics. However, at the time, we would smash protons with an energy of 120 GeV. And in that, we would make antiprotons. So that's a ton of energy. It's true that the CERN accelerator, the big accelerator, is now much higher energy than the Fermilab accelerator was. No problem. But that's not how they make antiprotons. All of these big laboratories, it's not one accelerator. At Fermilab, there were 5 distinct accelerators, and it was basically like shifting an old standard car because you couldn't just go 0 to super speed in one accelerator. You had to go from one to another, getting higher and higher. Well, at CERN, they use basically their second gear in their very big accelerator complex to make antimatter protons. And their accelerator is only 26 GeV compared to the 120 GeV at Fermilab. Fermilab's not operating, but when it was operating, it operated at an energy about 4 times higher than what CERN is doing now. And why is that? Well, it's because what CERN needs to do is to not make as many antiprotons as Fermilab did. They are doing a very different current experimental program. They're doing a fascinating experimental program, including trying to figure out, does anti-gravity fall up or down, which is kind of neat. And we sort of know the answer to that. That's separate. But anyways, so getting back to the antiproton business.
Yeah.
Well, Fermilab doesn't do it now. It was top dog. It's not anymore. The only really big antiproton accelerator creator is a small accelerator at CERN. Okay, so that's the antiproton thing. And if we get back to antimatter, we could talk about that because that is way cool.
Yeah, super cool.
Now, the other side of your thing about making high energy unknown particles, bigger is better. And it is true that the LHC is a very high energy machine. It is about 7 times more powerful in terms of energy per collision. It is also about 100 times more collisions per second than the Fermilab machine. So it is true that the LHC can make bigger, heavier particles that the old Fermilab, the Tevatron, ever could.
Mhm.
And that is true. So if you want to look at high energy stuff, yeah, you go to CERN now, which is why many of my colleagues, including myself, once we had measured all of the sort of frontier measurements we thought we could make with the Fermilab accelerator, we saw this bigger, more powerful machine with 7 times the energy and 100 times more collisions per second. We said, heck yeah, let's go work on that. And to give you a sense of scale, the top quark, which is the heaviest particle ever discovered at Fermilab in 1995. There were 2 discovery papers, and the one on which I was a co-author, we had worked for a good chunk of between 6 months and a year of collecting collisions, and there were a lot of collisions. And our paper had 38 top quark candidates, 38. And we knew that half of them were crap, because when you make a detector like that, there's what you call background. So you have the background and the good stuff. And we know it was about 50-50. So we had maybe 19 top quarks after working for between 6 months and a year of collecting data. But now at the LHC, we make a top quark every second. And that's what higher energy and more collisions per second will do for you. That extra energy, you're above threshold, you make a ton of them. And when you compare the 1995 Fermilab accelerator to the current CERN accelerator, it's probably 1,000 times of collisions per second. So it went from painstaking, pulling teeth to, yeah, now top quarks are a background. We try to get rid of them. There's just too many of them. They get in the way of searching for the stuff we really want to search. They are like so 30 years ago.
By the way, is there something to be said about the kind of sort of signal processing here? How you remove the noise, how you remove the background, how you determine which particle is which. There's
Oh,
probably some like incredible nuance there, even outside of the scope of this conversation.
so let me just throw some numbers out. All right. So at the CERN accelerator, when it's operating, the collisions occur at a prodigious rate. We get about a billion with a B collisions per second. Now, each one of those,
Wow.
yeah, that's what I said.
Wow.
Now, it turns out some of them are happening at the same time. So there's about of order 40 million moments in time per second where you would take a shot, and inside that moment, there might be 20 collisions.
Mhm.
So that's where we get to the billion.
Yeah, but can you individually pinpoint the collisions?
Sort of, to a degree. So the beams are, the when people think of beams, they think of like laser beams, but that's not really what particle beams look like. Particle beams look like little tiny sticks of spaghetti, except they're much thinner. They're not as fat as a stick of spaghetti. And they're at the LHC, different accelerators are different. They're about this long. And so you have one of them going one way, full of protons,
Mhm.
and another one going the other way, full of protons, and they pass through each other.
Mhm.
And as they pass through each other, you should think of this as like a swarm of bees.
Yep.
And this is like a swarm of bees. And mostly the bees pass through each other and don't do anything. But every so often, some of the bees hit nose on and stripes and wings and
That's
everything
awesome.
everywhere.
That's awesome.
And so as they collide through each other, one collision's here and one's here and one's here. And you can't tell too much side to side because the beams are really small. They're sort of the thickness of a human hair,
Mhm.
but you can see along the direction. And this is about the right size. And so we have detectors around them, and we can actually see, oh, particles came from here and particles came from
Mhm.
here. And that's amazing. All right. So at any one crossing, there's maybe 20 collisions. Now, most collisions are absolutely boring. They're boring because they exemplify physics that we know a great deal about already. We've tested it for decades. We know all about it. We don't care. I mean, it's kind of blasé that we can say, oh, yeah, we're making a billion subatomic particles every second, but who cares because, but that's just the way of, frontier scientists. So what you need is you need to pick out the cool ones, the weird ones, the ones that nobody's seen before. And so what happens is these beams collide and we surround the collision point with an enormous detector. There are two absolutely ginormous detectors at the LHC. One of them called CMS, which is the one I'm on, and the other one is called Atlas,
Mhm.
which is the other one, and we don't speak of because, well, no, they're both really amazing.
Okay, it's good to know that there's friendly competition even inside
Yes,
CERN.
yes.
That's
I
awesome.
mean, the fact is they are both amazing, absolutely amazing
Right.
detectors.
But CMS is just a little cooler than
Oh, yeah,
Atlas.
yeah. I mean, in particle physics, we really absolutely want our competitors to do extremely well, just not quite as well as we do. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
All right. So these
So,
two giant detectors.
right. So, but one of them, our detector, the CMS detector, it's the small one.
Mhm.
It is 70 feet long, 50 feet high, 50 feet wide. It's 5 stories tall. It weighs 14,000 tons.
Mhm. Small one. Yep.
Small. Atlas experiment is 150 feet long, 80 feet across. It weighs only 7,000 tons, just
Yep.
piece of cake.
Yep.
You could take the Atlas detector and you could put 4 of them on a soccer or a football field, and it would fill the field up with just enough room on the sidelines for the cheerleaders and the water boy and the coaches and stuff. That's how big they are.
Nice.
So these are absolutely ginormous detectors, and basically they're cameras. And what they can do is they can take pictures 40 million times per second. Now, all the data comes streaming off that detector, and we can't record it all. It would just fill up all of our tapes, and it would be full of all these boring things we don't care about. So what we do is as the beams pass through one another, we teach our detectors to say, we only want one where there are certain configurations that might be interesting, like there's gobs of energy in the detector, or there's a gob of energy on one side and nothing on the other side, or there's 4 gobs of energy, or whatever. These are called triggers.
Mhm.
And so what we have is fast electronics that take the 40 million possible pictures per second, and it says, about 100,000 of those are really cool. We should think about them. And then it passes not all of the 40 million, but those 100,000 to the next level, which are commercial processors that have basically our final analysis code, but optimized to run very, very quickly. And what they do is they do a really quick and dirty analysis to say, to further refine what's good and what's not. And that computer farm then accepts about 1,000 collisions per second. And we record those for further analysis. So that's what's really happening. Of the 50 million possible collisions per second, the fast electronics and then the computers pick the 1,000. And then we pass those through analysis software and hand them to the graduate students, and they pick through them, looking and finding the handful that are the next Nobel Prize. So that's how that works. And that is truly astonishing. Hats off to the accelerator builders, the detector builders, the people who make the software work, the people who make the not gigabytes, not terabytes, but petabytes of data flow around the world seamlessly. It's really amazing. I'm very grateful